able to show you what behaviors are going to be useful to us, I am going to continue with the same application that we have been building. And I have gone ahead and created some new things in here. The first one that I have added is a new expense details page to my views folder. And in here I have done a couple of things. First, I have simply defined a few labels that are going to be displaying the details of an expense. The amount, the name, the date, the category, and the description properties. So I have just set up some stack layout in here, some unique form of presenting this. This is nothing really fancy. I'm just setting some styles that I have defined directly in here in this same SAML file. So hopefully you are familiar with the styles. If not, I am simply defining a few styles for labels and setting some properties, some values for those properties. And I am setting the style to that static resource. I will talk about the VM in just a second, but I'm of course creating this namespace reference and I'm defining a new resource of that type. Now that type is this new VM that I have created that has one property of type expense, which is the one that I'm actually going to be binding. If you're noticing, I'm binding to that expense, except I'm binding to one property of that expense as well. So I just write the name of the property that comes from the view model and the name of the property from this property as well. So really, again, nothing weird in here, just that property in the VM. And from the C# file for this expense details page, I have created a new override for the constructor that is going to be requiring that expense. And I'm just setting that expense to the expense property of the view model. So what I want to do in here is simply be able to navigate to this expense details page. As I navigate, I am going to be using this second override of the constructor, passing this expense. Now, the interesting thing and the thing having to do with behaviors is that I have to do it from the expenses page. Now, the expenses page is a list view. And while the list view has an item selected event, I don't really want to have code behind. So some code inside of my expenses page.cs file. I want it to happen in a better way. And of course, there are some other ways in which we could achieve what we're about to do, but I want to use behaviors. And so it's going to be clearer in just a minute. Let's go ahead and implement behaviors. The first thing that I will do is add a new folder to my project that is going to be behaviors. So again, the code is going to be entirely inside of the shared project, in this case our .NET Standard shared library. And I will add a new file in here that is going to be simply an empty class. And I'm going to call this list view behavior. And of course, what I have to do is make this list view behavior class inherit from behavior. And behavior, the type, is actually going to request to which element is this behavior going to be attached to. And in my case, it's going to be to the list view. And I will need a using directive in here. Now, just like this, I will be able to tell the behavior that it is going to be a behavior for list views. Now, what I do want to do, or what I need to do, is first override the unattached to method. And actually right here, I'm using the bindable object. There is another, there it is. There's another unattached to that actually already uses list view, because this is a behavior for list views, which is going to be quite important because not only do I need to know when is one of the items in the list view going to be selected, I also need to know which item was selected, which means that I will need a list view variable in here. So let me just define a list view, and inside of the unattached to, I will set that list view variable to the bindable variable that I'm receiving on the unattached to. So this is one part. Eventually, I will be able to access the selected item from the list view. But when is that? I will have to do it when the item is selected. So there is an item selected event inside of the list view for which I am going to create an event handler. And so in this event handler, I already have the list view. I can access the selected item. Let's access it as an expense. I will add the corresponding using directive in here. This is going to be my expense variable. Actually, let's call this selected expense. And this is simply going to be equal to the list views selected item. Now, of course, selected item is an object. So let's just get this object as an expense, like this. And so my selected expense already has the value from the selected item of the list view. And so I will now be able to, from application, let's get the current application, get the main page, get the navigation, and push to a new expense details page using the second override of the constructor that is going to require the selected expense. So nothing fancy here, just the behavior this class is inheriting from it. Now I do want to override another method in here before moving forward, which is going to be the onDetaching from, and again using the list views version. And all I'm going to do is simply unsubscribe for that event handler. So instead of plus equal, just minus equal. Hopefully nothing new in here. Basically what we are doing is implementing the same functionality that we would have in the code behind in this behavior. So hopefully nothing new so far, except for maybe the fact that we're inheriting from this behavior type. The next step is the one that is a bit more important. The next step is to navigate over to SAML and tell this list view that this behavior has to be one to which it has to attach to. And that is going to be quite straightforward. Because this behavior is already for list views, this behavior can be attached to this list view. And it's going to be quite straightforward again. The list view is actually going to have a behaviors property. And it turns out that this is actually a list, by the way, an array of behaviors. So we could assign more than one behavior to one item. In my case, I only need one, but we could assign more. So how do we set this list view behavior to be one that this list view has to have attached? Well, the first thing is to be actually able to access to this list view behavior type, which means that we need a namespace reference to this namespace, which is going to happen almost identical to what we have here for the VM, except that this is not going to be called VM. Let's call this behaviors. And of course, the namespace is going to be expensesapp.behaviors instead of .viewModels. And so now inside of behaviors, we can, through behaviors, access the list view behavior. Just like this. That easy. Just like this, we are now saying that the list view is going to have this list view behavior attached. And again, our list view behavior is already going to be attaching it. And while it attaches, it's going to get the list view, create an event handler for when an item is selected. And when the item is selected, it's going to get the selected item as an expense and navigate to the expense details page. And then when the behavior is detaching, it is going to unsubscribe from that event, which is always a good practice to unsubscribe from event handlers. So this is pretty much everything that we need to do. We can now go ahead and test this out on one of the simulators that we have. So here our application is going to be up and running. We can navigate over to the expenses tab, select one of our expenses, and I'm actually missing something greatly important in my details page, the view model. I haven't assigned it to anything. So let me access the resources and access the VM as an expense details VM. So a huge step I missed in here. So I'm just assigning again from the resources that we have over here in the expense details page, which is this resource that we have right here, as an expense details VM to my view model. So let's try one more time. go over to the expenses, select the expense, and now we get correctly navigated. And you can see that precisely the item that we have just selected is the one that is passed to my expense details page, assigned to the corresponding property of the view model, and so we see all of those properties being bind. And this is the simple UI that I created. And we can actually go ahead and create a new one in here. Let's call this rent. I set this to 2000, rent for September, today, which is the 24th of September 2018. Housing as a category, click on save. Go ahead and navigate to this, and we see those same things that we have just set when we navigate here to the details. So there you have it. This is how we implement behaviors. Basically, all we're doing is making a specific class inherit from the behavior type, set a type to which this behavior can be attached to. This, by the way, could be view, so it can pretty much be attached to anything. In this case, we did require this to be list view because we need to access the selected item. In this case, we do need this item. We need to subscribe to the item selected event. And eventually, the more important thing, or the more interesting thing, is that we have a behaviors array in the list view. And this is, for example, also present in buttons, in entries, and many other SAML elements. And again, another thing important here to notice is that this is actually an array. We could have many behaviors inside of one single element. So there you have it. This is how we used behaviors. In the next lecture, we're going to start to take a look at yet another thing that we could do with SAML and some more specific code, that is effects.